Hello and welcome to a new BookBase interview where today we talk to author Ryan Consell, a science and mathematics teacher that's also an author. He's known for his popular series Stealing from Wizards that started in 2019, having the fourth entry, Volume 4, Arson, come out next week, this upcoming Tuesday on November 4th. Before we get started, if you'd like to follow Ryan on his journey, please check out his website, stealingfromwizards.com, as well as his Instagram and TikTok at studentofwhim, WHIM. And finally, feel free to check out his Blue Sky account at stealingfromwizards.com. But Ryan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, of course. So I love starting off with this question, but essentially, what made you want to become an author?
Absolutely nothing. I had no aspirations to become an author. I know some people grow up with it being their dream. In school, I did not love writing, and didn't find any love for it until I could stop doing it for assignments. And then once I was free of the school environment, I started writing for fun and discovered that I created novel length works
Oh,
for in my evenings for the joy of it. And after several, they got good. Um, Stealing from Wizards is not my first book, it's just my first good book. Uh, so yeah, I sort of backed into it and ended up creating something that I was convinced I should publish, and then it sort of blew up.
that is awesome, and I can totally relate with that story, not as a writer, but as a reader. I know when I was sharing a little bit of context for BookBase before, I talked about how I hated reading, and it was essentially because of school. And it wasn't because that, like school wasn't able to give us good books, but, according to the curriculum that they had, I just didn't really feel that attached to any of those novels that we were being forced to read. So coming out of it, I was like, I am never touching a book again. Like I do not want to read ever again. And it's kind of surprising how the second that you stop doing it as an assignment and you do it as like a form of passion and something that you just really enjoy, you end up doing more in a less amount of time than you would if it was an assignment. You're talking about how you naturally wrote novel length novels, but that's crazy. And it wasn't because it was an assignment. You just generally care about just writing and you generally care about your own craft. It naturally comes about.
Absolutely. And there's nothing that kills a passion for something so much as having to do it. I'm lucky enough that I am, as you said, both an author and a teacher. I don't think I would be an author if it was my full-time job. I would hate every minute of it.
Right.
But because I get to do it at my own pace, as much or as little as I want, following my dreams and my passion, it's a joy to write,
Yeah.
where having to do it as a day job would probably be miserable.
No, I totally understand that because I believe there's a saying where people have told me this before too, where you don't want to make your hobby or your interest a career without understanding that it takes away a bit of the allure of it. Where if you make it your life, then all of a sudden the choice of doing this for your spare time, it goes away, it becomes a priority, and that sometimes takes the wonder out of things that I feel like people consider it being their hobbies and interests.
Oh, absolutely. Can confirm. I so but before I was an author and university teacher, I was an artist and blacksmith. So I was making armor and art pieces, and it was a slog. Like, it was wonderful to be able to create every day, but it took a toll on my body.
Right.
I didn't get to choose my projects. I just had to do what was going to pay the rent. And it really took the joy out of it. And then going back to industry, the joy of art came back
Right.
because we're not trapped in that world.
That's incredible. I think that's a great lesson to learn. But the fact that it came from your experience being a blacksmith, I think is just so crazy. What was that like? How long were you a blacksmith for?
So I was more of an armorsmith than a blacksmith.
Okay.
Which they are slightly separate skill sets. There's a lot of overlap. I'm hitting a lot of metal with hammers. So but blacksmiths would be very offended if I called what I was doing
I
blacksmithing most
see.
of the time.
Mhm.
But I spent about a year being a full-time armorer, metal worker, leather worker, costumer artist, like professional artist. Um,
Wow, that is incredible. That's such a great, side, just a side quest. I feel like it's a great fun fact too, where if you're talking to people, you can just say like, first off, I'm an armor smith, and no, that doesn't mean blacksmith. And I'm pretty sure at that point people will be like, wait, what? What is that? And then just talking about it is so cool. And I guess this kind of leads into the second question that I had, where including this experience, I'm sure helped. But where did the inspiration for your series Stealing from Wizards come from?
oh, so it started off as a conversation around a campfire. We were on a canoe trip up in Algonquin Park, which is a big national park in Ontario, Canada,
Hmm.
out in the back country of Algonquin Park, and we're just chatting about the popularity of Percy Jackson and Harry Potter and those sorts of things, and we were thinking, well, Percy Jackson's a very American magic school.
Hmm.
The themes of the novels, the themes of the stories, the characters, they're very American. Harry Potter, very British. The themes, the morals, the arcs, very British. What would make a very Canadian magic school?
Hmm.
And that idea got stuck in my head and rolled around as we paddled across big, beautiful, placid lakes in northern Ontario and wouldn't go away. And about 2 years later, a novel came out.
Wow.
Um,
I think it's great how it starts off with a camping trip to get this inspiration for a Canadian magic school, because I think like, the greatest point in that is that it's the most unorthodox like beginnings that end up leading to like the great things that we create today, where you don't really need to go to a quote unquote crazy event to be able to get an idea for a crazy novel, or you don't need to have a crazy experience to be able to think about concepts. At the end of the day, it can just be a conversation with people, and you're doing something that you care about, and then you just start thinking.
yeah. And a bit of an opportunity to just let your mind wander. I think that's one of the other great things about, or where it came out of the canoe trip, is when
Right.
you're going across quiet lakes, you sort of just have yourself, your mind, the trees. You don't have all of the inundations of modern life, all of the scrolling and the media available.
Yeah.
So you can just sit and sort of mull over an idea, and then worlds and characters start to grow and create get a life of their own.
Right, absolutely. I think speaking on that, I could totally relate because I live in Los Angeles County, and sometimes I'm surprised we still have trees because it's just so much concrete, so many buildings, and there's a part of me where it's like I see LA and I think it's amazing that we have this architecture and this symbol of like progression as a society, but you then go to a couple miles up north or just in any direction, you go to a forest, and all of a sudden the pollution goes away, you start seeing the stars, you hear nothing except for your thoughts. And it's crazy how back in the day that was the norm. Now that's a luxury for some people, where to get that quiet time to be able to think about these ideas, you don't get that as much depending on where you're living. So that's awesome that you also talk about that, because I think that's important to be able to understand like your ideas and to flesh out your own thoughts to understand what you want to do.
It really is. And there are people around that grew up in cities like Tokyo and New York and Los Angeles that don't believe that the sky is what photos of the sky look like. They think they're like, I've talked to people. I worked in Japan for a while, and there were people there that just didn't really understand that like the photos of the night sky weren't fake,
Right.
because the lights of the city just drown it out, and they've never been to anywhere with truly dark skies to see the stars in the Milky Way. It's really a luxury to be able to go not that far and get really dark skies and see the beauty and the majesty of the night.
Right, absolutely. And I think you just need to write a memoir at some point, because you're telling me you've been to Japan, you're an armor smith, you're writing a Canadian magical book series about, just your characters. That's insane. And you're a teacher as well. That's awesome.
I'm just old. I've earned the gray hair. You'll have the same thing by the time you get here.
Right, absolutely. I would call it wisdom. You gain the wisdom to be able to talk the way they do. Of course, of
Very generous of you.
Absolutely. This actually leads to the next question. How has your experience as a teacher for science and mathematics allowed you to create engaging stories for a younger audience? Because I feel like that kind of gives you a little bit more insight on how you think you can create stories that can relate to younger people.
Oh, I think there's layers to
Yeah.
that. So I have been different kinds of teachers over my life. I've taught at every different grade level. I've taught from toddlers to octogenarians at different times. Right now, I do first year university. I'm a lab instructor in programming and science and math. Um, Really, what that's given me is the opportunity to meet an awful lot of people.
Yeah.
I think there's a like a truism in writing that you should write what you know, and what that really means is you need to know more things if you want to write more things, and books are about people. And I have known an awful lot of students and teachers, which is probably why I get a lot of feedback that the books have very like believable and full and rich characters. And that's probably because I'm writing about groups of people that I know and have known many of. And none of my characters are based directly off any person, but all of the students I've had, the kind of students I've been, the teachers I've worked with, the teachers I've had, all seep into the characters in different ways. And I think all of that experience as a teacher makes the whole school aspect of Stealing from Wizards more believable and more full and more rich because I am writing from experience, even though I did. Full disclosure, I have never taught, so far as I know, at a wizard school.
Right,
Um,
right. Yeah, that's great. I'm sorry, were you gonna continue?
oh, I'll talk forever if you don't interrupt me, so go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that I think that's another great point that you make about how your experiences can lead to creating more, immersive pieces of work. Because I think when you are creating a novel series about going to a wizarding school, of course the fun and the fantasy and the mystical is there, but it's also based in reality where you're a student going to a school and you're making connections and you have anxiety because maybe you're prepping for a test, or maybe you have a crush that you don't know how to talk to and you're trying to wiggle that around. And that really does make the imagination and the fantasy of being in a wizarding school seem more personal and relatable for anybody. You don't have to teach at a wizarding school, but I'm sure you know what it's like to be a teacher, and I think that can be relative for people that are teachers and they also teach, or for students that are also going through whatever experience they have in school, to pick up a book and be like, oh, I totally get where the student's coming from. So I really think that's exciting that you are able to not only do that, but also in your bio you talk about how you want to use material science and engineering to make science more accessible to the public, and I know you put that in your stories as well. And I also wanted to ask, how has that been going for you?
So with these books in particular, I sneak it in.
Mm-hmm.
These are not science fiction stories. Nobody's signing up for a physics lecture with these, but things that I try to sort of submarine in are implications of ties to ideas of physics.
Right.
So in physics, we have field theory and like quantum field theory with the Higgs boson and the Higgs field. Those I'm saying that like everybody knows what I'm talking about. The Large Hadron Collider sort of confirmed the existence of the Higgs boson, which is the particle that gives matter mass, which is neat. And then we have general relativity. That's a pretty good explanation for how gravity happens, but that also includes the warping of space-time. And we have special relativity, which talks about how time gets all warped, and it's very exciting. And we have, your classic E equals mc squared, where mass and energy are equivalent in a way that they can transform from one thing to another. And that is not in these books.
Mm,
But if you look below the surface, a lot of the inspiration for how the magical system is described
right.
is tying in the idea of inventing another field, a magical field, that interacts with thought. And because thought can interact with that field and transform into energy, that energy can then manipulate matter, and that interacts with all the other fields. So, just under the surface, if kids want to start really overanalyzing it, which I love to overanalyze fiction
Yeah.
and apply science to things where it doesn't belong, I have a lengthy series talking about the biology of Muppets. It's nonsense, but it's joyful nonsense where you might learn something.
Right, right.
So that's all just sort of submarined in there. If you want to look for it, it's there to delight the people who like science.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also some of the things I do for fun outside these books. I have a TikTok series about Muppet biology.
That is so cool. And I think that's a very unique interest that I think, again, furthers the immersion aspect of your stories. But I think is also something that encourages this quote unquote ability to nerd out, where I think there are a lot of people that love overanalyzing fiction. And I think, while I think I get this a lot in movies where there are people that will watch the same movie, someone will just say that's a great movie, get up and leave, and somebody next to them will be completely freaked out, like, did you understand how this concept does this and does that? I think the last time that really got to me was I saw the movie Interstellar, and of course it's science fiction, but the idea that you can use the equations and the physics that we know of today to potentially create a mythical world where you can apply this in space travel, and you can do stuff like dilation of time travel and seeing a black hole, and like I just thought it was just so cool seeing how science
Yeah.
works in media and how it makes it more fun.
So I'm 99% sure it was Interstellar. The supercomputer, the incredible graphics rendering power they used to like make that black hole look beautiful
Right.
was so good and so well modeled. Researchers did research on it.
Yeah.
Papers are published on the black hole modeled in that movie
Right.
because they put so much effort into That's so cool.
Yeah. I think it just pushes this notion where you don't really have to be a traditional scholar in a science field to be able to push the envelope on what we can do with how we understand the world today. Like I think Interstellar is a great example, and I'm sure your stories are a great example. We also talked about Project Hail Mary with Andy Weir. Like it's the same thing where, you are taking a non-traditional form of media, which is like novels or media such as films. You're combining it with something that people don't really combine it with, which is science or something that's more academic, more logical, maybe even linear. And then you combine it to create something that not only creates a great story, but it gives a little bit more of a takeaway where you come out of it thinking, is this even possible? And sure, that question could be no, but imagine how many people wouldn't even ask that question if they're in a chemistry lab or if they were in a physics lab and they're just doing an experiment they don't even understand. They're just thinking, gotta get the grade. Now they're thinking, whoa, like, is this even possible? Like, what is this about?
Well, and that's like one of the powers of fiction is to inspire some curiosity.
Right.
And like the best works of fiction make people ask more questions and go out and get excited about things. Like Jurassic Park launched 100 careers, or probably 1 million careers in paleontology and biology.
Right.
The X-Files filled people with curiosity about like mysteries and launched like there was a huge feminist revolution of women going into science because of Dana Scully. It's like good fiction can inspire curiosity. I don't think its job is generally to teach,
Right.
but it is to inspire that curiosity to go, is this possible? Could it be possible? How could it be possible? Let's go play with some ideas and do some genuine learning.
Right.
And I think sort of entertainment science communication lives sort of at that threshold where we are trying to teach you something, but at a level that you don't have to necessarily have a graduate degree to understand, to sort of help people keep up with the exciting changing landscape of science, because science is always changing. We're always adding things and learning new things and modifying theories to make them better fit what we've learned.
Right.
Um, and I think this goes back to our earlier conversation about school can ruin everything, just about anything.
Yeah.
If your only knowledge of science comes from being very bored in science class, um, it's incumbent on fiction authors and science communicators to spark a little bit of joy and enthusiasm and curiosity to sort of draw people back into being curious about how the universe works.
Right, absolutely. I think it's funny because you saying that just made me think about my friend who I remember in school hated math, but when it came to being a dungeon master for D&D, all of a sudden he knew the equations that calculate the chances of you landing an attack or your life points or even like the accuracy of like, your weapons and stuff. And I'm pretty sure arguably he did more math for Dungeons and Dragons than he ever did in his math class. But, it just shows that like there are ways to understand things that people sometimes consider quote unquote boring, but if you put that in another setting where it's something that's more fantastical, mystical, just has a little bit more of that fun element that people really look for sometimes, it just changes everything. The same thing goes for people that say they hate reading until they find a book they enjoy, or they say that they don't like a specific genre of music until they hear that one song that clicks with them. It's just it's amazing how connection to things are so rooted in your ability to want that curiosity, and once you attain that, being able to find more resources to be able to say, hey, I started with this, but now I'm looking into other things, and I think that's so special. And I don't want to get too I know we have other questions, but I also wanted to ask, do you have any examples or anything that comes to mind of maybe other books written by other people that maybe piqued curiosity in you, to maybe look into more science or mathematics, or maybe other books that you've read about or heard about that kind of push the envelope as well as doing entertaining science or
So like this is interesting because it's sort of two things at the same time, because you talk about like people finding a book and being like not being readers until they find their book, and one of the greatest joys of this series is hearing from parents that this was that book that their kid, this is the one that spoke to their kid
wow.
and turned a reluctant non-reader into a reader.
Hmm.
And like a lot of it is finding the book that's meeting your kid where they are, or meeting not even a kid, adults don't, or a lot of adults are like, I don't really want to read. But if you find the one that speaks to them, catches their sense of humor, catches their interests in the right moment, just in the right moment, it's transformative.
Right.
For me, it was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, um,
Mm.
by Douglas Adams, which is comedy science fiction, which like, and he did things with stories and words that I didn't think were possible.
Right.
I was probably 12 or 13, maybe a bit young for those books, but up until that point, comic books had been fun, but novels had been boring. And then here was somebody that was writing something that was like laugh out loud funny and quick-witted and sharp and playing with language in exciting ways. And that made me a fan of his enough to read his nonfiction. Douglas, that same author that did Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe, wrote a book called Last Chance to See, which is a travelogue going around the world with a naturalist trying to find incredibly endangered species
Wow.
just to go and find them. And it has his writing style, so it still has the wit and the weirdness and the playing with language that drew me to those books. But because I was a fan of those books, and so I read through this entire book and learned an enormous amount, and that sort of pulled me into that world as well. So that was just a gateway into learning that I would never have anticipated. I Maybe this means I now have to go around the world and find a bunch of endangered species,
Yeah.
so my readers have the same experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is so cool. That is so cool that people do that. Like, people will just travel with other people, find cool things around the world, and write about it. And, it's just the way that you communicate, honestly. Like, the fact that you were talking about that author, like, the quick wittiness and, the humor. that creates so much, I feel like, joy for people that want to dip their toes into a field that they just don't know a lot of. But it's people like that that can kind of merge that gap and just say, hey, like, if you're curious, this is what I'm doing right now. And I'm not saying you have to check out endangered species, but I just feel like if you ever get that want to just do something crazy like that and just want to explore the world and take note of it, I'm sure your writing style that you've been working on ever since you started writing, I think would only help you be able to communicate that. And I think that's so special. I think that's the real gift of writing, is that once you start that process to learn about how you write, it never turns off. Like, it's an ongoing talent, and that's really cool how you see the world with that lens where there is a chance where if you're looking at things through a fictional lens for fantasy and wizarding, and then you take that and you go, well, what else can I do with this writing style? That's where you kind of create that really personal relationship with your readers, because that's how I feel like that's so special for an author to say, wow, this fan really enjoyed my fiction, so they jumped onto my nonfiction and they still enjoyed that as well. I think that's a really rare compliment I feel like people get when you just really are so passionate about your own stuff. You're just trying to stay unique to what you really enjoy, what you really care about. And that's really awesome, especially as someone that's starting a series like you. Like, it's clear that you really love fantasy, you really love the mystical elements of the world, but you also have respect for the science and the logic that goes behind some of the fiction that you write about. And I think that's really clear, I think, for the readers that really read your stories. That's why I feel like people that are reluctant to read jump in right after they read your stories, is because you kind of hold their hand into showing that hey, this is quote unquote, if you strip everything away to its bare element, yeah, this could be similar to things that you learn about in school that you're bored about, but let's keep on wrapping it up in beautiful ways to where you start seeing this overall present that is just really shiny. You open it and you're like, whoa, this is really cool. Like, I'm learning about things I never thought I would really learn about. And that's really awesome.
Yeah, and it's fun to build up a story that has the layers to peel away if you want to.
Right.
And like you were talking about, you can go and just enjoy it for what it is. Like, you can watch a movie and just enjoy the experience and walk away and not think.
Mm-hmm.
But it's nice to know that if you start peeling back the layers, there are things to find there, and there's joys to, as you said, nerd out about it,
Yeah.
and to sit and think more deeply and tear it apart and play with the little pieces. And that's exciting when that can be possible.
Absolutely. And I know your newest addition to your series is being released this upcoming next week, early November, Volume 4, Arson. What was that process like, trying to create the nitty gritty details about the fourth volume compared to maybe the ones in the past where maybe you were focusing on other elements?
So the fourth volume is the end of the series. This is a quadrilogy.
Oh, awesome.
So volume 4, Arson, is the end of the 4-volume arc, and it was hard.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out finishing things is difficult. In the earlier books, I could just open up a mystery,
Yeah.
and go, well, here's a little tease, and maybe we'll deal with that later.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth book is the later.
Right.
And so all of those boxes that I opened and didn't close within the books themselves, like, each book is its own story. It's got its beginning, middle, and end, and everything resolves up of the main plot.
Mm-hmm.
But there's little hints of mysteries and questions and uncertainties presented and sprinkled through.
Right.
And now I have to nail all those down. And that was hard.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's not a very descriptive word, but it took when I started book 2, I thought I knew where things were going.
Yeah.
And they didn't. that did not work.
Okay.
One thing you need to accept when you're writing, especially if you're writing series of novels, is the best laid plans are going to break. You can have a wonderful plan, and then you'll write into a corner and go, this is boring or terrible or awkward or clumsy, or there's a giant gaping plot hole that I didn't see until I had written several chapters, and now I have to delete them all. And so after Kidnapping was finished, I had to really sit down and think about all of the themes of the series and where they were going and where the next place for the characters were, and just daydream away for almost a good year. So didn't even put pen to paper for anything after the third book for a solid year before the fourth one really started to coalesce and I could see how things could wrap up in a really satisfying way. And I wasn't 100% sure it was going to be the last book until I was probably three-quarters done writing it. And I was like, yes, this is gonna work.
Right.
Um, so there was a lot of uncertainty in the process,
Wow.
and a lot of discovery along the way.
Yeah, I'm sure that must be exciting yet scary at the same time. Where the most, you think it's a great plan. You write the second book. Turns out it's not going that way at all. I'm sure there's a little bit of not even frustration, but a little bit of like natural anxiety that comes with, kind of questioning the path. Like, okay, it's not going to go this way. That's fine. Where is it going to go? And it's up to you to decide that. And I really think it's great knowing that you took the proper time to see where this ending was going to go, because I think people sometimes feel pressure to continue something, especially like a series. I feel like when people are really big fans of the overall series, and classic examples, George R. R. Martin with Game of Thrones, I don't think this world yeah
The poor guy, like,
right.
I mean, he can sob into his giant pillow full of money, but like, people are absolutely vicious about him getting this book done, and clearly he's like, it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And like, I honestly had the luxury of doing that. Again, I have another full-time job.
Right.
I don't have to worry about pumping out another book so I can make my rent and feed my cat.
Yeah.
Which really gives me the luxury to take the time I need.
Right.
Like, I have some fans who are demanding, but not the screaming hordes of like a super famous author.
Right.
Like, most of them are just like, is it ready yet?
Yeah, that's cool though. I think that's awesome when people do keep on showing that interest even though you're in your process of creating it, because I think it's usually the demanding fans that are the most loyal to wanting to find out how the story wraps up. And I'm really excited to see what the reception is for Arson, because just as much as I feel like I'm sure for you it must have been such a satisfying journey to finally wrap this story up. I'm sure other people feel the same way, that we're on that journey to read those stories to finally also get to that ending. And I know you kind of touched on it right now, but I wanted to ask, you're finishing up this quadruple series. What is in the future for you? Do you kind of see yourself touching, like, do you want to take a break from it, focus on other aspects of life, or do you have any ideas that you've probably had in your head that you're kind of wondering if it's time to maybe shoot that shot in the dark to see if you want to go with that? Like, what is it like finishing a series like this?
So the answer is I don't know what it's like yet because it hasn't quite happened. It hasn't quite hit me. Right. I got the first copy of like the first print copy of Arson in my hands 2 days ago.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, a book has arrived. How exciting. And then I like looked at it and almost had like a giddy breakdown. Like, I was just having an overwhelming pile of feelings that I'd never had before and didn't know how to process. Yeah. And then Tuesday it's actually out, and then it's done.
Right.
So I don't think I'll know for about another month or so what it really feels like. It's exciting. It's like, there's a lot of pride. Like, this was been almost 9 years from the first idea to publication, and 8 years of solid work. I've never had an 8-year project before.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming for it to be done and complete, and to have this like thing that I'm proud of and have had like fans and excitement along the way. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what's going to happen. I know I'm going to take a break. I don't know how long that's going to be, and I'm pretty confident that in not too long another book is going to start coming out of my fingers, because every year or so since I was 28, I've started a book. I've written several. You won't read them, they're not very good, but but it's just a thing I do for fun out of joy. And so I have a few ideas that have been sort of quietly in the back of my mind while this universe has occupied the front. So maybe they'll blossom into something else. Maybe something new and exciting will inspire me. Maybe I'll go around the world trying to find endangered species. We'll see.
Well, regardless of what you do after, I think, first thing I want to say is congratulations. I think,
Thank you.
of course, I can only imagine the work that you put in to create this series. And it's not even work that people put on you, it's a pressure that you put on yourself because you're the creative. It's your work, and you're the one that essentially chooses how you want the story to go about. And, of course, it's extremely daunting in some aspects because you're like, oh my gosh, how's this going to work out? But I think, one thing that I'm sure you're going to feel is that pride you were talking about, where you actually did it. And this 8-year journey, I'm sure it started off with, I'm sure the same feelings of giddy breakdown-ish, where it's like, I did it, oh my gosh, what's next, what's going to happen? And it's the same thing that's happening now, but except it's more of a looking back feeling where you're like, wow, I did this, instead of a looking forward on what's going to happen. You went through the ringer, you did everything you did, and now you're able to look back and say, hey, I created a story about a Canadian wizarding school, and I'm able to do 4 amazing volumes that people also get to enjoy with me. And I think that amount of satisfaction, I think no matter whatever happens in the future, that is a personal satisfaction that you get to have. And that's really awesome. I'm glad that you have that as a creative to say, hey, I did this for other people, and of course for myself, but I did this for some people out there that want to enjoy this with me. And so that's great. I'm really happy for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, of course. So this kind of leads into our last question, but this has to do with something that I feel like people don't really talk about. I know I kind of explained BookBase before the interview, but another aspect about BookBase that our co-founders, excluding me, really find special is our platform is used to create book clubs. And we've always seen book clubs as an exciting endeavor that people create to kind of inspire more reading or to just create conversation over literature. But I feel like in today's world, it's kind of a little bit of a diminishing, aspect of society where I don't think many people really get together as much to really talk about reading. And that's what technology is doing with BookBase, is that we get to do that on a virtual scale. And one thing I love asking people is, their experience with reading and talking to people about it, or if they've been in any book clubs, or if they've just done anything with books, or if you read it with a friend or something. I just wanted to ask if there's any memories or any fond moments that you've had with other people that kind of revolve around books or just reading.
Oh, yes. Again, old gray hair. There's um, so it, what I'm getting is a flood of little memories across my life.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the big ones, a good place to start, is I was very lucky in having parents that read to me.
Mm.
And they read to me, especially my dad, who's passed away now, read to me much later than he needed to. I was reading chapter books on my own, but we kept reading books together because we enjoyed it as a family. So that was just a wonderful memory to sit around and have my dad read books to us, usually make silly voices for the various characters, of which my mother would make fun of him because he had one accent and they all had the same accent. um, and that's just a joyful childhood memory,
Right.
that's really cherished. Oddly, like in high school, much like you, not a big reader, but a lot of my friends were.
Mm-hmm.
And so I read vicariously through them. I got them to tell me about the books they were reading and the stories they were reading and what made those stories great. And that was an opportunity to just sit and listen and get people to tell me stories and about the things they loved and about the things they were excited about.
Right.
And sort of, I haven't thought of it this way, but upon reflection, it may be one of the things that made me a better writer, is because I spent a lot of time, rather than just reading myself, listening to other people being excited about books and understanding what made them excited and what brought them joy and what parts of the books they talked about and what kinds of books they talked about and how that went together with them as people and their personality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is such a great connection. I actually, now that you mentioned that, you're totally right, because I think I've been more inspired to write after talking to people about stories that they enjoy, or books that they've been reading that really touched them or really made them energetic, just kind of gave them emotion. And I think that's another great part about a creative world like this, where you're able to create stories and share them with people, is that I feel like it's a positive feedback loop where you create something, you share it, people love it, you want to write more, people love it more, it just keeps on going and going. And I think if you're able to get that type of loop in your life in any regard, I think that is such a great way to live, because it just shows not only how determined you are to see this happen, but also how great people are at giving you that support, and to give a clear sign that, hey, you're in a good support system if you're able to do something you care about. And people that have no obligation other than the fact that they care about you to look at this and say, hey, wait a minute, like this is great, or like, hey, let me share something with you that I think you'd enjoy. I think that's a great connection in general, and I think that's such a great way to wrap up that question, is just talking about how the social aspect of reading. Yes, it's great to talk about books, but it's the lingering thoughts and the lingering emotions outside of that conversation that kind of stick with us throughout the days and the years, of course. So yeah, no, thank you so much, Ryan, for sharing that. That was such a great way to like kind of end the interview. I think that was just a great wrap up. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your journey on stealing from wizards, your journey being an armor smith, going to Japan, being a teacher, and most importantly, like, just sharing your passion. I think it's very clear from just talking to you. I know we just met, but hearing the way that you speak about your stories and just life in general, there's energy behind it, and I think that's very contagious. So thank you so much, Ryan, for coming on to our interviews and just being able to speak about things that you care about.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure,
Of
Nathan.
course, of course.